My name is Sanderia Faye, and the title of my book is Mourner's Bench.
Book Lovers Unite. I'm Demethius Jackson, and you're listening to the Chapter 1 podcast. The greatest stories ever written all begin with Chapter 1. In each episode, our guest authors will share their first chapters with you. Today, I'll be speaking with multiple award-winning author, Sanderia Faye. She's also a PhD candidate at the University of Texas and is a co-founder and fellow at the Kimbilio Center for Fiction. And today, she'll be speaking with us and reading from her book entitled Mourner's Bench. And it starts right now.
At the First Baptist Church of Maeby, Arkansas, the sins of the child belong to the parents until the child turns 13. Sarah Jones is only 8 years old in the summer of 1964 when she decides it is time to get baptized and take responsibility for herself. That means sitting on the mourner's bench when the church revival comes, waiting for the sign that her sins have been forgiven, and then testifying in front of the whole congregation. But first, Sarah needs to navigate the growing tensions of small-town Arkansas in the 1960s. Both smarter and more serious than her years, Sarah is torn between the traditions of her community and the progressive civil rights and feminist politics of her mother. When organizers from the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, comes to town just as the revival is beginning, Sarah can't help but be caught up in the turmoil. Most folks just want to keep the peace, but her mother, along with local civil rights activists, the SNCC organizers, and indeed most of the country, seem determined to push Maeby, Arkansas toward integration. Mourner's Bench is a story of a young girl's coming of terms with religion, race, and gender, while also navigating the terrain of early adolescence and trying to settle into her place in her family and community. 4 generations of women live in Sarah Jones' house, Miss Brady said. She pointed to the sketch of my family tree leaning beside the blackboard right under the calendar we'd made that read 4th grade class, October 1964. I stood on one side of my poster and she on the other side, pointing at it, each brown branch with a green leaf. Sarah, will you tell us the person you have listed on each branch of the tree, she said. Yes, ma'am, I pointed with the ruler. On the first branch is Granny, my great-grandmother. Her real name is Pearlie Hopkins. The next leaf is my grandmother, Moselle White. We call her Medea. I left the leaf blank where Esther's name should have been, and pointed to the next branch. The next leaf is for me, Sarah Jones. Hands flew up in the air, almost every student. A few stood up, including Malika. Calm down, class. Take your seat. You will get your turn, Miss Brady said. I wasn't expecting them to act that way. Malika raised her arm up and down as if she had to go to the restroom in a hurry. Miss Brady pointed to her first. Why didn't you include your mama's name? She said. Miss Brady looked at me. She seemed more curious than Malika. I stared at Malika, daring her to take it back, and gave the same stare to the rest of the class. Malika held her ground and dared me right back. Sarah, Miss Brady said, my mama don't live in the house with us no more, but she's still alive. I rolled my eyes at Malika. That ain't good enough answer, is it, Miss Brady? She said. It's all I got, so leave it alone, I said. I knew she wouldn't stop till she got the whole class stirred up. She'd been that way ever since we got double promoted from the 1st to the 3rd grade. Always trying to prove who was the smartest, and seemed to like it better when she had witnesses. The principal and teachers had tried to convince Granny to let me skip the 1st grade altogether, but she turned them down. After the 1st year, she went ahead and let me skip the 2nd grade. Granny blamed Sister Tuckle and Uncle Robert for teaching me too much. Malika asked me question after question. She knew the answers. We talked it over. She tried to goad me. I wasn't falling for it, but it was too much for me when the other students got in on it and she should have backed down.
To all my book lovers out there, do yourself a favor and check out Half Price Books. With more than 120 stores across the country, Half Price Books is America's largest family-owned bookstore. At any of their locations, you can buy and sell new and used books, music, movies, games, electronic devices, even collectibles. And Half Price Books has been dedicated to literacy and environmental initiatives since 1972. They give back to the community by supporting hundreds of worthy projects, including this one, and have been the leading drive behind programs like the Million Books Donation Project and the Half Pint Library Book Drive. Find a Half Price Books location near you by checking out their website at www.hpb.com. There are a lot of talented individuals out there, including you, so why not share your talent with the world? Well, you can with Sunfire Talent. Sunfire Talent is an internet-based talent agency focused on generating mass exposure for everyday people with amazing skills. The company's mission is to help talented people with limited resources showcase their abilities and be discovered on a global stage. Check out featured artists and be featured yourself if you have the skills on sunfiretalent.com. That's sunfiretalent.com. Thank you so much for joining me today. Mourner's Bench is a very serious book that touches not only on the racial tension within this Southern community, but also the tension when a family doesn't agree on how to deal with it, particular the subject of segregation, correct?
Correct. Yeah, this book took on a whole life of its own because, well, for one reason, when I started to write this, I was a brand new writer. And so I didn't know what I was doing, actually. And then as the story over time began to gel, I began to grow as a writer. And I wanted to show how a community and a family would act toward the stranger who comes to town. And in this case, the stranger was the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, which was the student organization that came to the South to desegregate the schools and in this particular town, desegregate the restaurants. This town was totally separate. So it was supposed to be a story about just Sarah and her friend Malika. And they are both fourth graders in 1964. And so I decided to let 8-year-old Sarah be the narrator for the story, like a reporter for the story of 4 generations of women. Because there was so much history out of this small Arkansas Delta that I didn't know, so I knew the rest of the world didn't know. And I thought that she would be a good character to place that on her shoulders and allow her to navigate. As she tried to navigate through adolescence, it allowed her to navigate through these other issues of equality and civil rights.
That's one thing that you don't particularly hear about as far as the opposite positions on racial discrimination back in the day. You know, I didn't even realize that there were some folks that were against segregation or desegregating, I should say. You know, when you read it in the history books, it's as if we all wanted to do the same thing. We were all marching along the same beat. So just to have that perspective is interesting.
Yeah, that was something that I found very interesting as well. I actually thought that every African-American family had a pair of sneakers and picket signs by the sofa. And so when they got the call, they were ready. But I find that is very much similar to the Black Lives Matter today and the other movements that are associated with that. Not very many people were interested. And some families, like this one, was torn apart over that one thing. Also, I believe that the churches all had their doors open and you could have a meeting there any time of the day or night, and they were supportive. And I realized that only about 15% of churches participated. So that led me to believe that probably 15% of families participated. The other thing, we always wonder, why don't we see this from the female point of view, from the woman's point of view?
Yeah.
And I realized that women in 1964 were not supposed to be leading a civil rights movement. that wasn't their role at that time. And so, like in my book, many women were ostracized from their family, from their churches. The churches believed that they were rebel rousers, stirring up trouble, things like that in their community. And then the last thing I'll say about that is that the other thing that surprised me is that I didn't see very much about the role of children during the civil rights movement. And when you actually think about it, Ruby Bridges was 6 years old when she desegregated the elementary school in New Orleans. And other students are very young. So it is the young people, the very young, that are put on the front lines, even though their parents and their students, college students, are also working toward desegregation. It is the child that is put out to go to actually do some of this work.
That is amazing. 6 years old, desegregating schools. Times have definitely changed. I was just telling my 15-year-old cousin recently that the struggle is not having to wait in line for the new Jordans.
Oh.
So on the subject of children, tell me about Sarah Jones. You describe her as an old spirit, and she certainly seems to be dealing with living in multiple worlds and just trying to keep everything together at such a young age.
Yeah, Sarah is like many children who are born to single parents. And her in the 60s, her mother was a single parent. She wasn't married. And because her grandmother was so involved in the church that was a huge sin for her daughter to have a child out of wedlock. So already that left a stigma on Sarah and her mother. And then her mother left town to find a better life, which many African American men and women did during the 60s, what they called the Great Migration, which happened before then, but it continued on through the 60s, going north or west to find a better living. And so Sarah's mother had been one of these people as well.
So it was her mother that triggered Sarah, this 8-year-old girl, to start taking on personal responsibility.
Yes, from her mother realizing that obviously she was a sinner and had backslid from the church, a backslider. And so therefore she knew that she was doing everything right, pleasing her grandparents. And so therefore she felt that she would be more responsible than her mother. So yes, her mother triggered it, but the preacher preaching this sermon about it made her understand, or her own understanding of what this meant.
I guess I should have asked this question first. What exactly is the mourner's bench?
Oh. Yeah, in the book it has a literal and a metaphorical meaning. Some Southern churches, and maybe some Southern churches still do it, but I know until the 80s, I believe, there's a revival every year. And children is almost required to get baptized by the time they are 13. Mm-hmm. And so during this revival, starting before the revival, you start praying for God to send you a sign. And then during the revival, you sit on this bench that they create in front of the church. You own the fact that you are a sinner and that you're praying for God to forgive you for your sins. And so if you do get that sign that you ask him for, then you're baptized that Sunday. So it's a long process. I believe in the book it was like 2 weeks.
Oh wow!
That they are in mourning for their sins, and some people, they do get the sign could be something as simple as "Let me see 2 red birds" or something like that. These are kids.
Something that takes you beyond yourself.
Right.
Puts you in the present moment. Mm-hmm. I understand.
And it's very serious, though. It's a very serious act that, but it's, to me, I think about arts mitzvahs, and it's all of these things about coming of age, 13, like even with Jesus, what happened to him when he was 13.
Yeah, so this was quite an ordeal that Sarah was willingly going to partake in, just based off of her convictions.
Yes, I've had people ask me about that, and did I think it was right or wrong, or was Sarah completely stressed out about it? I think that if you grow up with traditions, that you don't become stressed out or anything like that. It's just a tradition.
It's just what you know.
It's what you know.
Yeah.
And so this was part of her coming of age, rite of passage. It was just part of that. She'd seen it all her life. Everybody that she knew had gone through this.
What was your reasons for writing the story from Sarah's perspective, being so young and maybe even possibly not understanding all the things transpiring around her as far as the racial tensions of that community?
Well, a couple of reasons why. I wanted to have the innocence of a child. I also wanted her to see things literally, and I didn't want her to have any defenses. Say, for instance, when you were turned down to register to vote. Usually the stories in the movies that I had read or seen, you just see the stoic person walk away, and you don't really see the exact pain that they're in. And so through Sarah, I wanted the reader to be able to experience that pain raw.
Yeah.
And but what it has done since the book came out that I didn't know that it would do was the innocence of what comes through Sarah's mouth allows the adult to be able to have a conversation about race. And that has been one of the most important things that I've seen with the book.
There were a lot of civil rights organizations during the 60s and the 70s. Particularly, you talk about the Student Nonviolent Coordination Committee. I had never heard of them before. Who exactly are they?
Many students left their colleges, left the university, and came to places like Mississippi, Alabama, during the height of the Civil Rights Movement. John Lewis now is one of the most, Congressman John Lewis is a person that's most known for organizing during the Civil Rights Movement.
Yeah.
And so they organized, and their goal was to desegregate schools. There was a Freedom Summer, and I talk about that in the book as well. And this is where they taught African American history and other courses at community centers in these different towns in the South. So that's some of the information about SNCC.
It seems like each generation has their civil rights organization or their own civil rights movement, even ours. Speaking of, how do you think Sarah would feel about the current racial climate in America today?
Well, I believe that she would think that the civil rights movement didn't end, that it just continued. And even though some things got better, other things got worse. We look at the schools now. After Brown versus Board of Education, schools throughout the United States are still very much segregated and it's definitely unequal. So that would be something that would be of concern to her. I think that she would hope that people from the Black Lives Matter would see that there's something to be learned from what happened in the 60s and to continue with that. And if possible, if she wasn't too old, I believe she would probably pick up a picket sign and try to do whatever she could as well to support what these young people are doing now.
Where did the idea for Mourner's Bench come from? Are there any parallels between the story and your own personal life?
My mom was an activist. She actually married one of the SNCC organizers that came to our hometown. And that's about as far as it goes. One of the things that really made me want to tell this story is because when I did my research, I did realize that my mom had put her life on the line for this. And then there were some other people in my hometown that I knew very well. By the time I started working on this, they were already deceased. But they were very instrumental in the civil rights movement, like Miss Carrie Dilworth and Mr. George Stitt, even in the Southern Tenants Farmers Union. And I knew these people, but I didn't know any of their stories. And it was very challenging they are not the people that have been written about. Attorney John Walker, who still is a civil rights attorney in Little Rock. And so they were people that had not been written about. And I didn't think that maybe they ever would be written about since there wasn't anything so far, just bits and pieces, snippets here and there. So I thought that at least that I owed homage to them by placing them in my book, that it would be something that you could pick up and see their stories and see how their stories interconnected.
The unsung heroes.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah. So tell us about yourself. How did you begin writing in the first place?
So this was an Oprah thing. And sometimes I hate to say it because I know that everybody has this Oprah thing. But for a long time, I had just had this emptiness inside and I didn't know what to do with it. And so I've been a huge advocate of the Oprah show. The things that she had, that I had taken on from her show, the suggestions that she gave, had really worked in my life. And so when she talked about finding your passion, it seemed like every time I would come home from work, that would be the show that was on, like finding your passion. It's like, what is passion? And what am I passionate about? And I realized I really don't know myself very well at all. I don't know what I'm passionate about. I don't know if I have a passion. Is there such thing as passion? And will that really move you to some place, right?
Yeah.
And so actually it wasn't just me, some friends and I, we set out on this journey to find it. What is it that I would want to do? Some people say, oh, what is it that you would do for free? And I still couldn't figure it out. It took me about 2-3 years to really come to terms with what is it? And then they would say, go back to your childhood. What did you like to do? Well, I came from a working family. We worked all the time. You would come in from school, put in our books, work, and everything. And so I didn't ever think about what it was that I like or didn't like. And so one of my friends said, you really don't know what it is? I'm like, no. She was like, writing.
Right there the whole time, huh?
Right there the whole time. And Oprah had said that. It's like the light will come on.
Yeah.
And I was like, that is true. She was like, every time somebody needs something, they come to you to be written.
Don't you wish that you were just born with an instruction manual that just told you about yourself instead of just like years and decades having to figure this stuff out about yourself?
Yeah, I think so. And I think the misunderstanding that I had about passion too was that you would just love it so much you wouldn't get tired of doing it. It wouldn't piss you off or anything like that.
The romanticism
I
of it.
really believe that this is the thing that I'm supposed to be doing. But some days I don't like coming to the page to write. It's like exercise. It's good for me, but I don't like getting up and going to the gym or to the track or anything. But yeah, it would be nice. But what I did realize is that when I was much, much younger, that it was there. But I didn't come from a family that would water that plant. And so it died. But I do think if it's ever there, at some point, it grows again.
For me, I didn't even realize I was a writer until I was like 30 or 31, because it was just something that was always there. You know, ever since I was a kid. It's like how a fish can't see the water it's swimming in.
Right.
And then one day I had one of those moments where I just stood outside of myself and saw objectively, and I'm like, oh my God, I think I'm a writer.
Yeah. I wonder why. And I wonder, is it more with African Americans too? Like, because even now I still have, like when people say, what do you do? And I hesitate because I'm in a PhD program out at University of North Texas now. I'm getting my PhD. And so I go to that first. Like I'm a PhD student. And then I have to think, I was like, I do have a profession here. I'm a published author. Yeah. And so, but that isn't ever my first thought.
Same here. I'm the exact same way.
Yeah. I wonder what that is. But I also say that climbing over my doubt is one reason that I don't think you could serve any wine before it's time. But I also believe that I carried so much doubt while I was writing this book that it probably could have slowed down the process tremendously.
Yeah, that's called imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
Where you feel like you're a fraud. I mean, I'm an award-winning author now, and I still feel like I suck every day. And it's just like I have to sip my coffee and put myself in a different mindset. And
it's not even in just coming to the page. It's overall as well, because I keep thinking, somebody's going to find me out, right? It's like, well, what are they going to find out? Like, yeah, that I'm an imposter, that I did something wrong or whatever. And sometimes when I'm talking and I realize that people are actually listening to me.
Do y'all know what I'm talking about? Do I know what I'm talking about?
Right. I was on book tour for a while before I realized that I really do have something to say. And I really do have something relevant to say as far as the movement is right now. This book is relevant to what is going on right now in our society. So I'm really proud of that. And that's something you can't predict when you're writing a book. It just comes about. Like, who would say that a book that I worked on 12, 14 years would be relevant today?
Absolutely. You've actually branched beyond book writing. Okay, you host a number of events throughout the year, one of which I hear includes wine.
Well, I studied to be a sommelier.
What's that?
A person who knows about wine. And so the thing that I learned about myself is that I have a good nose. I can actually smell a wine and tell you what's in it. And so I was very proud of myself for that. But I even when I was taking the classes, I wondered, how would I ever use this, right? Because I couldn't see myself working in a restaurant or a wine store or in places that you would normally use it. So I know that when I read, I have a glass of wine sometimes. And so I decided to take the book, right? And I've done 2, and I have the 3rd one that I'm getting ready to do. But I look at the book and I ask the author to give me the mood of the book from the beginning, the middle, the end of the book. And based upon what they tell me, I pair it with wine. So say for instance, my book, I think the first pairing is maybe a Pinot Noir.
Okay.
And then the next pairing may be a Merlot, and the last one a Cabernet. And so if you go to my website at sanderiafaye.com, you will be able to see the pairings. But it's a lot more work than you realize, because you're looking for, I'm not tasting actually. So I'm looking for something that goes with the mood of the book. And then at the end, there's a contemplation based upon what I've done. And when you're sitting around talking about the book, there's a contemplation. And so that is like a after dinner drink, like a cognac or
an aperitif. Yeah,
something like that. So anyway, people are finding it to be interesting, and some book clubs are calling me asking, what should we drink when we talk about this book? And so if you're interested in something like that, please go to my website, leave me a message. One of the things that I do feel as an artist and an author is that you need to give back to your community. I was on the board of Workspace Dallas for a number of years, and now I help them with events. And so one of the events that I'm very, very excited about starts February 2nd, 2017. And it's a collaboration between Workspace Dallas and the South Dallas Culture Center. And the name of the series, we're going to have a 3-month series, February, March, and April. And the name of the series is African Diaspora, New Dialogues. And so we're bringing in some of the best award-winning authors, African-American authors, to the South Dallas Culture Center. So if you want to find out more about that, go to workspacedallas.com or the South Dallas Culture Center, and that should be on their websites as well. But I'm hosting that event starting February 2nd.
Okay, right on. Is there anything else that you'd like to tell us?
Buy the book. It took me a long time before I could actually get out those words, but I really don't believe that you'll be dissatisfied in the book. And it's worth the read. So get the book, support your authors, go to the library and get it if you don't want to purchase it. But it's worth the read. It's been very instrumental. Like, I've spoken at middle schools, high schools, universities, and it starts a conversation that I think that we need to have in America. And so do that. And you can follow me at sanderiafaye.com. Also, my Twitter is at Sanderia Faye, You can find me there and on Facebook under the same name. So please follow me, send me a message. I'll answer back. And I hope that when you do get the book that you will enjoy it.
And with that, we'll wrap up another episode. Special thanks to Sanderia, and shout out to Deep Vellum Books, which has become my new favorite hangout. As always, if you have any comments about this episode or if you know an author that you think would be a good fit for the show, let me know. Hit me up at info@ch1podcast.com. Send me a message on Facebook and like the Chapter 1 podcast page. We're about 4 months into this podcast, and I like the direction that we're going in, and I hope you do too. We have a nice lineup of some amazing authors coming up and some fantastic stories to share with you. Till next time.